Hi guys, Squall here. Welcome to another episode of TMCN. This is the Q&A series that we like to do every now and again, and it always has a theme. And the current theme for this video was suggested by That Scary Guy, and the theme was difference in generations. That's what we're going to be discussing today. I'll be picking your questions from the last video, and we'll be answering them in this video. I need more theme suggestions, so when you do submit your TMCN question, don't forget to tack on the end of your question any theme suggestion. And if you want to submit a question for the next video, the link is in the form description where you can submit that. The next video theme will be everyday life, and that was suggested by Kavorka Scania. So everyday life is the next theme, so get your questions submitted for that, and I shall answer them in the next video. Right, let's talk about the truck and the journey and that kind of thing. So I've got a 450 brake DAF, it's a mid-lift. We've got a HCT trailer. We've got about 40 tons of fertiliser on the back already loaded. And our route today, well, is basically through Finland. It's from here in the north of Finland up in Kemi, and we're going all the way down to Turku. That's the plan. It should pay nicely, about 40 grand I think it is the paying. Let's get started up here. Let's get our lights on. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? This is the default Scania, the default DAF. This is not a mod or anything. And the HCT trailer obviously came with 1.33. If you're wondering about the route advisor at the bottom there, and you're wondering how I've managed to do that, that is a mod. That is Hemmel's route advisor. And all those mods are in the mod spreadsheet, mods.squirrel.tv. Again, all the links are generally in the video description, so please look down there before you ask a question, just in case I've already answered it. Let's jump in the cab, and we shall get going here. Now this is going to be a fun journey, because I'm going to have to concentrate on this trailer, whilst also trying to answer your questions. Ooh, that's a heavy load. I like it. I've also got, obviously, the if you watched my physics video, you'll be aware of the physics changes, the slightly undocumented ones that came with 133, and yes, I have those enabled. So trailer instability and all that is maxed out. All the settings are on 0, which means it should be fun. If I go too quick, we're definitely going to flip this thing over, no doubt about that. I was hoping we would actually get to join quite easily, but got clearance at the back? Yes, we have. Right, let's get on with some questions. So, as I say, the theme is difference in generations, so expect questions on differences in generations. I left that open to you to interpret, which you have done. Lots of different kinds of questions. So we'll kick off with a question that came in from both Connor Harper and Declan Lloyd, and I think a couple of others had a very similar type question. It was probably the obvious one. What other differences do you see between the newest generation, the younger generation, and your own generation? So yeah, that was an obvious question. Well, the differences I see between my generation and the younger generation, I would say things like access to information. The younger generation has virtually limitless access to information. They can look up cultures, they can look up knowledge, like anything they want. That is apparent. So in theory, the younger generation should be way more well informed and worldly wise, just because of the sheer communication and access to information and video and culture difference. Like just anything and everything now. The world is much more connected than it was when I was younger. Social media, that's another thing. Things that you do now, you know, crazy things that you do when you're young. These days, chances are somebody's pointing a mobile phone at you and filming it. Therefore, it could be, you know, when I did silly things when I was young, probably just been forgotten, hasn't it? Whereas now, somebody might well be filming it, and it might be on the internet, and you can't take it off the internet once it's up there. So that's another difference. I think also the slightly more negative aspects are, I think, like detachment and respect, I would say. Basically, what I mean by that is the internet has kind of given us this, hesitate to say, keyboard warrior generation, this kind of anonymity this ability to sort of hide behind the keyboard and throw comments over the wall to people, particularly unsavory, nasty comments as well. Just some of the comments you see these days, some of the things people say on Twitter are just, the humanity has kind of been taken out of it. Like, you wouldn't stand in front of a person and say those things, and I think that's a bad aspect of the internet, I guess, and that's kind of been adopted by the younger generation in the way they talk to people now. It's quite apparent that there's certainly a drop in respect amongst, I think, the younger generation. But then, I remember my grandma saying similar things about my generation. She would say to me, "Oh, the way you talk to each other, the way people talk to their parents, the way people talk to the policeman. Now, in my generation, you got a clip over the ear, all this kind of thing." So, I keep an open mind on these things. Maybe it's just a generational problem, but I think certainly the internet has definitely brought keyboard warrior anonymity to the table as well. And I don't think that's a good thing, and I don't think we can get away with it much easier. Get rid of it much easily. So there is that. I think in my generation, kids definitely played out a lot more. I played in the street, played in the parks, out. I was always out. If it wasn't raining, I was out, That's just what I did. Until home computing kicked off, at which point I spent a lot of time indoors, and I think that's just what people tend to do now. They spend a lot more time indoors on the computer and connect via the mobile phones, and that's just the thing. I don't think that's going to go away easily. So yeah, much more social. Going back even to, say, my grandma's generation, they would go to the theatre, watch live performances, like go to dance halls, like connect with people so much more, whereas now the connection is, I guess, via your thumbs and your keyboard on your mobile phone. Like, that's how people talk. I don't know. I think we've kind of lost something there for sure in society, but I can't see how we're going to get that back easily. Now it's just a kind of a faceless thing. But hey, anyway, good question. So next one is from Matroshka361, and he says, do you prefer playing old-fashioned games or newer ones? Now, I think what he means by that is like retro games. That's how I take that. Me personally, I like playing new games. Like, I can see on Twitch that retro gaming is very popular, and that's a cool thing. But for me, like, I grew up with those games. I literally grew up with them. I played them when I was younger, so retro games don't really have an appeal to me. They have an appeal, I think, to the younger generation who have never played that stuff, and there's a lot to offer back there. Like, some of the older games are fantastic. So I fully understand why people would play retro games, but for me personally, it's not really a thing. Like, I always look for the next and greatest type thing. I've always personally, because I came from, like, ZX Spectrum days and the Commodore 64 and all that kind of thing, I've been as part of the generation that's always wanted better, like, that's always wanted more fidelity, better sound, more realism, and that never stops for me. That's what I always want. So, one second, I'm just looking at the sat nav and I'm thinking, is that gone crazy, or do I need to actually turn off here? No, it's a roundabout. Okay, I do. I thought it was one of those crazy situations where it asks you to get off a highway via a junction, which brings you back onto the highway, that kind of crazy thing. But it's not that. It was just a roundabout. I thought you'd have to concentrate. So anyway, yeah, I like the newer stuff. I think the older titles, like, definitely have their advantages. They come from an era where gaming was you would produce a game and you would release it onto cassette or CD or DVD or whatever it was, and that was it. Once it had gone out the door, you couldn't patch it. Like, people literally played that, and that was it. Whatever you delivered, they played. If it was buggy, nothing you can do. As a result, I think games were tested a lot more, I think. Even though I don't think there was many people to test them, they were still tested a lot more because they couldn't be patched later. Whereas now, we kind of live in this world of early access and kickstarted games, and getting the public to do your testing for you by releasing it as early access and then dripping content out, sometimes with horrible bugs in it, and then at some point declaring it as finished. even though sometimes it really isn't. And then you get things like, you know, The Forest, which has been in early access, I think, for over 5 years, and 7 Days to Die is another one. You know, things like that is just unthinkable when I was playing games when I was younger. Absolutely unthinkable. You know, games were finished and then they moved on to the next one. Like, they didn't even release DLC. There was no such thing as DLC. Like, you built another game and called it version 2. You know, that's how it was. So, yeah, I mean, going back, there was a lot of gameplay. Like, because you couldn't rely on graphics, or fantastic graphics and fantastic audio to carry your game, you had to rely on gameplay. And so there is a lot to offer in older titles, but as I say, it's not really something that I kind of look to go back to. I just play the latest and greatest stuff, mostly simulators or shooters. That tends to be what I play these days, which hasn't really changed for many years, to be quite honest with you. Anyway, good question, Matroshka. Next one, I think is also from Matroshka. Do you like old-fashioned music, example 70s, 80s, 90s, and more modern music, for example 2000s to the present day? That is I mean, music is pretty timeless. That's the thing. It's not like, you know, games on a PC or a console that have a shelf life. I think music is, you know, once there's a fantastic song, it's always a fantastic song, or, you know, a piece of music is always fantastic. So hence why we still have classical music from hundreds of years ago still being played to this day, and enjoyed by millions, and quite rightly so. When it comes to pop music, it tends to be, I think, the melody that mostly survives, and then it gets redone. You know, people do different versions of songs like 10, 20 years after it's been written and performed, do their own kind of take on it. That doesn't tend to happen with classical music because, well, for a kickoff, it's not generally sung. Did that car need to go back in the back of my trailer then? Did you see that? But in terms of, you know, in terms of actual music I like, I love 80s music. 70s, not so much. Although there are exceptions to that rule. For example, you know, Jean-Michel Jarre, his Oxygen album is still just a fantastic piece of music and always will be. Pink Floyd, you know, 70s, they did some amazing stuff. So there are, you know, exceptions to that rule, but generally, like 80s, I like that stuff. 90s, I must admit, I found the 90s music quite boring. I thought the 80s was way better, but that's just personal taste. Not really a pop music fan these days. After the 80s music and the boredom of the 90s music, second, let's just focus. I kind of branched out my musical interests quite a bit, started to look for other things. That's around about the time when I was, you know, getting into Jean-Michel Jarre and other kind of electronic music, and then things like, you know, Terminator and various other films introduced me to, and Blade Runner and stuff like that. They kind of introduced me to movie music, which then got me into the kind of composed pieces. People like Hans Zimmer do that kind of thing, and I love that kind of stuff. So I kind of branched out a little bit more rather than just generational pop music. There are certain categories of music that I just don't like, so I don't tend to listen to those. But yeah, I mean, I've always loved stuff from movies, and I still do. I've bought plenty of albums of films, and you know, if I go down the gym, I'll listen to trance music and that kind of stuff, which is kind of high energy stuff. Or if I'm working and I need to sort of think, I'll put trance music on because it doesn't distract me, but it kind of stimulates the brain somehow. And if I want to chill, I can just put some relaxed music on. So I have very varied interests, I would say. But if you're asking more about pop music, I'd say 80s would be the genre that I would pick, or the era that I would pick. Next question is from Edwin Mendy, who asks, what decade of motor vehicles were the best? What decade of motor vehicles were the best? That's like saying, like, what kind of art is the best? I mean, that's just a subjective question, and I think it kind of depends on your point of view in many respects and what you're looking for in a car. Are you looking for comfort? Are you looking for ride? Are you looking like the handling of it, the reliability of it, the way it looks, the power, you know, the speed? there's all kinds of cars are always making such technical advancements, but then the styling of them will also tend to follow fashions and trends, and even things like, using, if you look at an Audi now with its LED lights and its indicators that, just, if you've ever seen an Audi indicator light, it kind of moves across and backwards. Like, stuff like that is only made possible because of technology. But they also kind of follow fashion to some extent and what people want as well. So right now, SUVs are very popular, aren't they? SUVs are extremely popular. Wait, where are we going? Straight on. Yeah. But the way the cars are styled is quite typical of like generational trends as well. If you look like a 60s car and then a 70s car, you will see the differences. 70s, late 70s, early 80s become very boxy, I think. By the 90s, they kind of started to get around to the idea of being able to press like curved panels, which is a technology thing, but also they were learning about, wind resistance and stuff and trying to make stuff more efficient. So that, of course, changed the styling of a car. So there's all that kind of stuff to consider. I think it does largely depend on taste, though. Whether you like boxy stuff, whether you like retro or, modern stuff, and taste being very subjective. 1 second. Just make sure I get around this roundabout. There we go. Some cars have been described as works of art. Certainly, like some of the Jaguars, some of the classic cars have been described, Ferraris have been described as works of art, just in their styling. Never mind the fact that cars are fundamentally designed to move people. The styling alone can be considered to be works of art. Older cars, though, tend to be harder work. Like, because of the older gearboxes and clutches, the older engines burn, older kind of leaded fuel, and there are higher maintenance due to the technology and build quality back then not being as, tolerances just not being as good. So they do tend to come with a lot of maintenance side, but a lot of people like that. If they're looking for a car that they can nurture or upgrade or just look after and enjoy and keep on the road kind of thing, and I get that completely. It's not for me, but I get that. But me personally, I just like modern cars. I tend to I like my creature comforts, I like my gadgets, so I tend to like, more modern cockpits with climate control and, satellite navigation systems and, heated seats and things like this, electric mirrors, electric windows. I tend to like all that stuff, so I tend to not go for the older cars. But the question was, which decade do you think were best? I mean, I couldn't put my finger on it. I think 60s produced some wonderful machinery. 80s had a lot of really cool rally stuff going on. It's hard to put your finger on it, isn't it? I mean, who knows? I honestly don't know how to answer that question, because I don't think I can point to any specific decade of motor vehicles and say, yep, they were definitely the best. I just don't think that's true. I could pluck a car out of each decade and say that's just an amazing car right there, isn't it? And nobody could really argue with it, because it is just classically good. And in case you're wondering what I drive an SUV, funnily enough. I mean, I'm a family guy, so I kind of need a car that can move the family around. So I have a Mercedes. It's an ML350 SUV, which is a 3-litre diesel, 6-cylinder 3-litre diesel. So it's got a little bit of oomph to it, but it's also comfortable and quite reliable. So that's what I go for. Next question is from the anonymous Brit, and he says, do you think over time social media will become non-existent due to the opinions of different generations of politicians and their opinions on privacy? Woof, woof. That's a deep question. Blimey. Okay, let's break this down a little bit. I think the problem with the internet is that nobody really controls it. And quite frankly, nobody really should control it. That's the whole point of the internet. It's boundless. It sits across the world, and no one country or politician should ever have control of it. Having said that, the internet has come under threat, hasn't it, from different countries and different companies that are trying to regulate it, and they're trying to control how we use it. Like net neutrality was one such example of that. Net neutrality is the cornerstone of the internet as far as I'm concerned. And in case you don't know what net neutrality is, it's basically that every internet service provider has to treat data equally. Regardless, they can't discriminate or charge differently depending on like the person consuming it, or the content of the data, or which website it came from, or what application is consuming it. Like, they're not allowed to do that. They have to move data freely. That's what net neutrality is. But the politicians, you know, I think it's the United States politicians are trying to change that, and I think they've succeeded in many ways. Like the FCC has already got some stuff through that basically breaks net neutrality. Oh boy. Okay. It's asking me to move over because I need to turn here, I think. So that's, you know, unfortunately already happening. The net neutrality is being kind of challenged. Copyright is another one. These are kind of, it's not the internet's fault. These are just kind of, it's to do with what people do with the internet that's at fault. It's like, you know, anything else. The way you use something is everything. And copyright is a big problem. So the politicians in the EU have created this thing called Article 13. And Article 13 basically is supposed to try and... Wait, why are we going around this roundabout? Okay, I guess we couldn't turn left there, so it's making us do a U-turn. Great. I need to have a chat with my dispatcher. This is not an ideal route for a HCT trailer, but hey, what can you do? Yeah, so Article 13 is in the news at the moment. And, you know it's serious when YouTube sends you an email about it, and when the CEO of Twitch sends you an email about it. You know that it's a problem when that starts to happen, and that's exactly what's happened, because it may affect content creators like me. And it isn't just people who live in Europe, it's people who produce content in Europe, like me. It threatens, because Twitch and YouTube, if Article 13 goes through, they'll have no choice but to effectively block stuff for consumption in Europe until I can prove that I own the copyright or have the rights to publish it and all the rest of it. It's just it's a massive mess, and it's a politician's example of them not understanding the internet and trying to tackle copyright. All the smart people will just jump on VPN, but most people won't do that, which means you'll just click on a video and it'll say, I'm sorry, you can't watch that in your country. And yeah, it will threaten livelihoods like mine, quite frankly, so it is a problem. Then you've got things like privacy, which was mentioned by the anonymous Brit in his question. You've got companies like Facebook and other such companies who have for many years effectively been abusing the data that they collect about you, what they do with it, who they sell it to, how they safeguard it, you know, all that kind of stuff, like your credit card details not being securely stored away, like all that stuff. The politicians will inevitably stand up and try to create policies that tackle these problems. Unfortunately, politicians, I think, don't understand the internet and probably never will, which means that these kind of crazy solutions they come up with to tackle privacy and copyright and net neutrality, all this stuff, they just come up with these ham-fisted ideas that generally make things worse for everyone. And they're never, frankly, like, companies and countries and politicians are never going to stop trying to control the internet and what happens on there, because to them it's like a free market, isn't it? Is what it is. It's a market for data to move around unchallenged, ungoverned, and people are free to do what they like. And let's face it, lawmakers don't like it when you have freedom. They don't like you having complete freedom. They really don't, so they try to take it away. And history shows us that the more you try to control something, the more you drive it underground. Because at the end of the day, life, as they say, will always find a way. Good question, though. Next one is by Jimmy Daly. Jimmy says, does the younger generation of sim fans respect simulation gaming less as the sim market grows, or does it teach them to respect the genre even more now? I think quite a number of young fans who've been fans of this channel for many years, they've written to me to tell me, and I've received many of these, by the way. They've written to me to say that, you know, they're inspired by my content and they've gone on to make a career out of the simulation that they love. I've had emails from young people who are now pilots. I've had people write to me who are now truck drivers or bus drivers or train drivers, like quite literally, they've gone on to do this for real. They obviously respect, you know, simulation. When they were younger, they respected simulation. They decided they liked it and they wanted to do that as a career. They saw simulation for what it's meant to be. It's a simulation of something. That's the point. I don't know what proportion of simmers like use sims seriously or use them for training or just have fun with it. I suspect it's probably like a classic bell curve, isn't it? You know, the classic shaped bell curve. In the middle is like the majority, and the majority are probably having fun with it, but they're not super serious. And at the bottom of the bell curve, you've got people who are just literally having fun. And at the top end, you've got the super serious tryhards who try to do everything by the book, you know. There's room for everybody in simulation. That's the point of it. I don't think it's fair to sort of say, you know, the younger fans have less or more respect for it, because I think it depends where you go, what you look at. Like, you can form an opinion based on what you see. And I kind of see across the spectrum. I see that there's everything and everything in there. Some young people are great with it. Some young people just treat it as another game and just, you know, have fun. In quotes, mess around, you know. So I think there's room for everything in there. You just kind of do what you want to do. It's your game. You treat the simulator as you want to. But I would say, if you do go online, for example, if you go into an online network, like say flying in VATSIM or something like that, then you really should be treating it as a simulation, because you've also got people who are sat doing the radio comms and they're treating it as a simulation, and that's what you should do as well. But, you know, so if you go online, I would say treat it seriously. If you're playing offline, just enjoy it. You know, do what you want to do with it and let other people do the same. Next question from Jorgen. It says, what do you think the future generation of kids will be most interested in? At the moment, it's video games, consoles, etc., but do you think that will change? Honestly, I don't know. The current generation of young people are interested in stuff that, you know, they do things that I'm not interested in, let me put it that way. Particularly around social media. They're like very heavily into Snapchat or whatever. I just don't touch that stuff, so they're already doing things that I have no interest in. It's hard to predict what their kids might go and do. It depends on what technology changes happen, I think. I mean, I don't see video gaming going away, and it's still a growing market, but then, you know, maybe interest in them will kind of rise and fall as we go through different generations. Kids tend to often push back and do different things to what their parents do, just because their parents did it, and they want to do something else. But then when their generation grows up, it tends to make a comeback, which is why in fashion you often see people, you know, not wearing stuff their parents wore, but often wearing stuff that their grandparents wore. You know, you get this weird generational thing happening. I don't know. It'll take some cool invention, and anything that basically captures the interest of a young mind, you know, in a big way, will just run away with it. So it's hard to predict. I don't know. It could be anything. Next question from Mick Pyro. How do you think technology changes life between generations up to the point parents don't understand their own children? Okay, I think for me it's different because I've always been tech savvy. I am a technical guy, and I always will be a technical guy, so as a parent, I'm a technical parent. But I'm pretty sure I won't ever be in a position where I don't understand technology, because technology largely gets simpler, not more complex. You know what I mean? It gets easier to use, not more complex. I think, you know, some people have no interest in technology. Some people are even frightened of technology. And when those people become parents, then yes, of course, they won't understand their kids and what they're doing with technology because they themselves have never tried to adopt it. But then, you know, you've got my mum, for example. She couldn't operate the VCR beyond pressing stop, rewind, and play. Anything else, like you wanted it programming to record some program in a few days' time, I'd have to do it. She just didn't get it. She'd always messed it up, and it wouldn't record what she wanted. And then she got upset. So in the end, I would just do it for her. So, I mean, that's a classic example of her not being able to kind of adopt technology because she didn't grow up in an era that was required to do that. So she was then of an age where it presented a fear. It wasn't something that could be easily embraced. I don't think that's going to be quite the case now because, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, everybody has to live with technology now. From smart TVs to mobile phones, like, you can't get away from technology. So there has to be some amount of adoption. But even so, I know plenty of people who have a mobile phone that is not a smartphone. It's just like an old brick Nokia, which only does text and phone calls, and that's all they want. And they are the older generation. The younger ones just want a big screen smartphone because they want to access Instagram and that kind of thing. Who knows what the next one will be? Probably wearable technology, I would imagine, will start to come in the next few decades. People won't be carrying around their phone, they'll be kind of wearing technology to do it. That's probably, you know, the whole Google Goggle thing. The whole kind of reality enhancement is probably how things will move. And I think older people will have a fear of adopting that. They won't want to wear technology. They won't want this stuff being displayed in their eyeballs, if you like. They've just been, whoa, I don't need this. So I suspect that will kind of happen. But the fact is, a young mind will always be more receptive to new things than an old one. So technology is always going to create an adoption gap between young and old, because it just is a fact that young people soak things up and are more open and don't have as many kind of biases or fears as an older person who was kind of a bit more set in the ways. And the older you get, the worse that gets. As they say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And that's where that phrase comes from. So there's always going to be a certain gap between generations. Next question is Adam Height, I think it is. Do you think simulations are reaching an older audience now as opposed to inspiring the next generation of people to go into a certain job? For example, DCS is rarely flown by teenagers who want to be fighter pilots. Well, I've already told you about people writing into me that have gone on to take a job in that sim, so it does happen. It happens quite a bit. I think, you know, simulators are reaching an older audience. I see that firsthand when I go to flight sim conferences. Flight sim does seem to have an older generation to it as well. Like, really, like a large proportion of people who go to flight sims are over 50. It's amazing. It really is. I think they're a mix of aviation fans who have kind of come into flying via a home computer. Like, they want to fly, but maybe they're too old or don't have the money or can't medically pass or whatever it is, but they love aviation and they want to try flight simming, and that's what they do. That definitely works. I think there's gamers who have just kind of grown older. Maybe they picked up home computing in their 30s or 40s and they've kind of now in the 50s and 60s, and they wanted something more serious, more mature, and flight simulation kind of works for them. Either way, though, it's definitely a thing. There are definitely a large portion of older people playing sims, and I've definitely seen it with flight simming, and I suspect it exists with train simming and bus simming as well. But that's not to say that young people are not simming. Quite the opposite, because you see people turn up with their kids, with young kids who are really interested in it or want to become a pilot, and they're already kind of learning the basics on their sim. I mean, heck, in the UK, you can learn to fly before you can learn to drive a car. It's hilarious. It really is. You can start to learn to fly at 16, but you can only hold a license when you're 17. But in a car, you can only learn to drive when you're 17. So it's nuts. Which means you can even start on a sim when you're like 13, 14, 15, and then by the time you're 16, you can go and do it for real. That's how you get ahead of the game on a sim. Next question from Luca. Luca says, do you think it's bad for children to grow up with phones, tablets constantly around them? Also, what do you think about parents posting photos of their small children on social media? Okay. I think it probably is bad for them to be around phones and tablets all the time. In the same way it's bad for them to be around TV or watching the TV all the time. The secret, I think, is to kind of try and get a mixed... It's like a diet, isn't it? You don't want to eat the same thing all the time. You need a mixed diet. It's the same with these TVs and gaming and tablets. You need a mix. Like, it's okay to do it, but you don't want to just do that all the time. If you give a young person a tablet, then, you know, how do you kind of control what they do with it? How do you control how much time they spend with it? Well, now you kind of get these parental controls, which is designed to directly address that problem. It's to try and give the parent back some kind of control, because the child can't self-regulate. They can't control how much time they spend on that tablet or on that phone. That's what the parental controls are designed to do, as well as obviously keep away, you know, the more unsavory stuff. But once you give a child a device like that, it is hard to control. There's no doubt about it. I think, as for your second part of your question about the parents posting pictures of their young children on social media, not exactly sure what angle you're getting at there, but I personally don't see anything wrong with it. I think it's fine for people to post pictures of the kids, like they're proud of them, and all the rest of it. I just wish that parents would post other stuff as well. I mean, quite, you know, honestly, jokes aside, I think a lot of parents, like especially new parents, all they do for the next 2 years is post pictures of their baby. Like, before they had a baby, they didn't care about babies, and now they've got a baby, everybody has to look at pictures of their baby. And it's really one of the reasons that I stopped paying attention to my Facebook feed, is because it just became a feed of baby pics and memes, and it just got very boring very quickly. So I would say to them, it's fine, but please do something else. Next question, Captain Viking, as we approach our destination. What do you think the next generation of the workplace will be like compared to the previous generation of the workplace? Safer, cleaner, more fun, better climate control, more energy saving. Like, that's the way offices are going. You know, factories are getting safer as well, like because of, you know, unions and laws and health and safety and all this kind of thing. Let's slow down to 50. Come on, shifter. Why you not? There we go. Wrong gear hype. Yeah, I think that's the way they're going to go. It seems like the direction that most workplaces are taking these days. However, also, I would say desk space is becoming more of a premium. Where are we going? Oh, he's been in the left lane. I've noticed, like, places I've worked, desk space has started to become more and more of a premium. They give you, like, smaller and smaller desk space and more people in one area, in order to reduce, like, the amount of floor space they need to rent. So there is, you know, there is bad sides to this. Are we definitely going this way? There's Satnav having a joke now. So yeah, maybe it's not all good, you know? Temperature controlled, energy saving, cleaner, but hey, you've only got a little box to sit at. Maybe they'll get rid of your chairs next so you have to stand in order to get more people in. Focus for a second. Can I squeeze a question in? Dark Wombat, is there anything that the current generation has that you would have liked when your generation was young? Online gaming, for one, and access to the sheer wealth of information that young people now have. Like, the abilities, like, I could sit there many, many, many times when I was younger going, how does that work? I wonder how this works. How does this do that? I was always like a physicist kind of curious kind of person, how everything worked. I wanted to know. I think maybe that's where simulation comes from with me. But anyway, like nowadays, you can just, within 20 seconds, have the answer or watch a video on it, which is amazing. It's so good. And I wish I had that when I was younger, because my information uptake would have been even greater. Oh boy. Can we do a quick question? Fatty Monk says, importance of sweets and chocolates really got smaller. My parents say it all the time. Yes, they absolutely have. It's been proven as well. Like, manufacturers slim down the candy bars instead of increasing the price. Snickers, Yorkie bars, Wagon Wheels, Twix bars, these are all things that I can tell you with relative certainty have shrunk. The list goes on. Like, there's web pages that exist that explain all this. Engine off. Let's deliver that. The manufacturers often argue they do it because it tries to encourage people to eat more healthily. What a laugh. Like, as if they care whether you get fat or get diabetes. Like, they don't care about that. They're just in it for profit. If they put the price up, you might buy it less. If they slim the chocolate bar down and keep the price to get more profit. That's what it's about. Anyway. Boom! That was a good journey. Very enjoyable. Hope you enjoyed that too. We managed to deliver that with no major incidents, which I'm amazed by, and had some great questions in there. Thank you so much for all those great questions on difference in generations. The next theme is everyday life. Please click on the form link in the video description and submit your question. And if you've got a theme idea, submit that in your question as well. Just say, here's my question, and then theme idea, boom. Hope you enjoyed it, guys. I certainly did. Till the next one, take care. Happy trucking.